Well, next thing that we do, according to Becker, is to just annihilate those folks that are different, thus removing them from the face of the planet and confirming that our God and our vision of reality is the true one after all. As some of you have heard me glibly say in the past, my God is better than your God, and we will kick your ass to prove it. All cynicism aside and all silliness aside, the point that Becker wants us to seriously entertain is that ultimately all ethnic strife, all armed conflict is the result of a psychological inability to tolerate alternative, death-denying cultural constructions. Now, let's not be simple-minded. This is not to suggest that there aren't geographical, political, and economic considerations that pervade human conflict. There certainly are. Well, the point that Becker makes, and I've really talked too much and I'm hoping to shut up in the next 5 minutes or so, is that if these ideas ought to be taken seriously, then what are the implications of them for us as human beings in the world in which we now inhabit? And at the end of Escape from Evil, Becker really has some interesting thoughts, one of which I hope is quite wrong, because he wonders at the end of that book if human beings are a viable form of life. He just says, you know what? We have to think about the fact that we may be a giant biological mistake. We are not an incredibly old species. Who's aware of that modern Homo sapiens sapiens, we've only been here for about 100 or so thousand years. Who's also aware of the fact that every human on the planet is descended from a tiny breeding population of no more than 200 individuals? Is anybody aware of that? We're an accident, quite frankly, and a rather young one at that. Bacteria have been here for 6 billion or so years. They're definitely proven their mettle. And other forms of life have been here for quite a while. The human being's not been here for that long, Becker reminds us. And what he points out is that having self-conscious pieces of mortal meat may not have been that good of an idea. In the short run, it may have been good because we have been fantastically successful. But now that we possess the technology to exterminate each other with about the same amount of effort necessary to play a video game, things may not work out too well. It would be arrogant and stupid to proclaim ourselves detached from nature to the point where we have some kind of privileged position that renders us immune from self-imposed catastrophe. And as I've joked with many of my students before over the years, there's a very real possibility in the absence of a radical change in the way that we conduct our affairs that in a few thousand years you'll have cockroaches the size of us looking at a few humans in jars of formaldehyde in museums next to some dinosaurs. They'll be going, yo, there's the dinosaurs. There's those people. They ruled for a tiny time, and then they really screwed up, and there they are in a jar. Cockroaches will be fine. They thrive on radiation. So when we're long gone, the world will be a better place for the roach. And just like mammals were midgets until the dinosaurs got snuffed, and then we got big, maybe the roach is a midget waiting for our demise. They're robust creatures, and they'll do fine in our absence. Let's hope that that's prematurely unfortunate, because if that's where we stand, let's just stop the conference and head to the nearest brew pub and drink as much as we can, as fast as we can. Let's hope that there's a different direction that we can go in, and a more hopeful one. And I'd like to think that just our presence here today is a very, I think, hopeful beginning to what might be a small but nevertheless significant start to a chain of events that twist things in a more productive direction. Remember, I started this tirade by saying that it's both awesome and dreadful to be here and know it. And now the trick becomes, how can we parlay our immense intelligence? How can we parlay the joy of being alive, into a way of living that does not ultimately result in catastrophic implications for folks that are different than ourselves? Well, quite frankly, the answer to that question is I don't know. Just like Becker, he was about to die when he finished Escape from Evil. I hope I'm not about to die. So his problem is he was dying. He didn't have time. My problem is that I have a small mind, so I can't think of anything off the top of my head specifically about how we ought to pull this off. But I will leave you with two things, and they're both Becker ideas, maybe three things. All right, thing number one is that I like Becker's idea that comes from the Enlightenment and pragmatic tradition that knowledge is power. I think all things being equal, historically, whenever we've understood something, that's helped us out immensely when it's come time to fix it. All right, so when we learned that syphilis was caused by bacteria, well, that helped us figure out that we needed to develop penicillin in the service of obliterating it. Until then, we hadn't a clue, and we weren't doing too well. Similarly, when we wanted to learn how to fly a plane, the Wright brothers learned about aerodynamics, and then they got a plane in the air. People said it couldn't be done, and yet they did it. And so when people say to us, oh, humans are always going to be like this, we're just vicious creatures, you can't change, it can't be otherwise, well, I disagree. I don't understand why we have to start with that attitude. Why not start with the attitude that the better we understand ourselves, the better we render ourselves in a position to rectify and improve our circumstances. So that's point number one. And that is that there's a hope, I think, that the more that we know, the better we have an understanding of why it is that we behave this way, then we're in a better position to do something about it. All right, point number two, and this is a Becker point, and I'll be intentionally obscure in the hope that we can continue to discuss this idea and that other presenters in the program to come will address it more directly, is that Becker also insists that there's got to be a religious dimension to any serious effort to improve the human condition. He basically said, you know what? There's no way that we're going to get out of this without dabbling in religion broadly defined. One of my favorite Becker quotes in The Denial of Death is that psychology can only take you so far, at which time it drops you directly on the doorstep of religion. All right, well, what does he mean by that? His point very simply is that every one of us, whether we like it or not, just to get up in the morning, we have to believe things about reality. Every one of us has beliefs about reality. They may be religious, they may be secular, but every one of us has beliefs about reality. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's no way that those beliefs about reality can ever be unambiguously confirmed. Well, then why do you still have them? Well, you still have them because you have faith. And the moment you get the F word, that's not the F word that most people are used to hearing me say, but the F word, the minute you get faith into the equation, you're beyond the boundaries of psychology and enter into the domain of religion. And one of my favorite phrases from this Oswald Spengler guy, who's ever read Decline of the West or heard of that book. Anyway, Spengler says faith is the beginning of all intellectual inquiry. Because if you didn't have faith, you wouldn't bother to think about things to begin with. And so Becker's point is that we need to have faith. We need to have faith that it is possible to envision a world other than the one that we currently reside in. And then we need imagination. We need to be able to imagine what it is that that world might look like. When Da Vinci drew pictures of helicopters, people are like, oh, what a lunatic. What's wrong with you, bro? And yet 500 years later, we're flying around in those machines. Would it be so ridiculous to imagine a world even slightly more pleasant than the one that we now reside in? And then on top of imagination, to have the courage to act in ways to make it actually happen. So that's a nice triumvirate for me. Faith, imagination, and courage, and I think that'll take us a long way. Anyway, I've talked much more than I had hoped.